The Paranormal Network invites you to accompany us on a new journey where we'll take you inside some of the most compelling and mysterious close encounters ever recorded. We'll examine the evidence, we'll listen to the witnesses, we'll consider every possibility. Join us as we investigate history's most infamous UFO incidents. It's been called the United Kingdom's answer to Roswell, the most infamous UFO sighting in British history, the Rendlesham Forest incident. Like so many UFO encounters, this one involves the military, with decorated members of the Air Force swearing they saw an actual unidentified flying object. Like so many UFO encounters, the event has fallen under scrutiny and skepticism, with plenty of quote-unquote rational explanations for what these men saw. Unsurprisingly, there is no definitive solution to this conundrum. There are only words of the people involved and the judgments of those who can only speculate as to what the truth really is. Will we ever know the full story? Maybe not. But we can take a walk through the forest and take a look for ourselves. The year is 1980. The Cold War is still very hot between the United States and the Soviet Union. In Suffolk, England, the U.S. Air Force is using 2 Royal Air Force bases to house planes, munitions, and some believe nuclear weapons. Sitting near the bases, called Bentwaters and Woodridge, is the Rendlesham Forest, a 3,700-acre woodland that was even bigger before some of it was cleared to make room for RAF Woodbridge. It's the early morning after Christmas, around 3 a.m., and some military servicemen at one of the Woodbridge gates see strange lights descending from the sky. Although the men are unsure what the lights were initially, the thinking veers towards the possibility it was an aircraft crashing into the woods. Let me take this opportunity to thank you all for watching UFO Incidents and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like this video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. Now, back to the show. 3 men are sent out to investigate the possible crash site. One of the servicemen, Sergeant Jim Peniston, would later say that he noticed that there were no trees cracked or disturbed in the area, which would make a crash landing highly improbable. He begins to feel a sensation of something close to static electricity in his body, and he notices his movements are becoming labored, as if he was wading through water. He and his fellow servicemen hear no sound, but as they walk deeper into the woods, they see a bright light emerge out of nowhere, causing them to hit the ground in a panic. After the light dissipates, they continue on their trek, eventually coming upon a craft. The craft, triangular in shape, is giving off a light show at first, emitting different colors for a while, before going dark. It's black and smooth and not very big, about 9 or 10 feet on each side and approximately 6 feet high. It has no flaps, doors, windows, or crew compartments. Peniston decides to follow procedure and do a security check, while also relaying exactly what's happening over the radio to home base, despite the fact that he can't hear them and isn't even sure if they're copying his words or not. There is no landing gear on the craft, though the craft is affixed to the ground somehow, which Peniston can see thanks to a dim light coming from below it. Curious, Peniston decided to push on the object to see if it would move. It does not budge, but it is warm to the touch on this very chilly early morning. Peniston notices some writings on the strange object, which initially relieves him because he thinks it will reveal just what the craft is, or perhaps who made it. Was it from NASA, the Soviet Union? His curiosity would be piqued even more when he sees that the writing isn't in letters and words, but hieroglyphs, which, unlike the craft, are rough in texture. He copies them as best he can in his notebook and decides to touch one particular glyph that fascinates him, and when he touches it, he's blinded by an intense white light and begins to have visions of ones and zeros, like a mathematical equation appearing out of nowhere in his mind's eye. After he gets his bearings, Peniston notes that the craft is emitting colors again, which forces him and the other men to back away from it. It begins to move itself, backing away from them, gliding soundlessly through the woods, which Peniston would later note is impossible since the trees are very close together in Rendlesham Forest and the object was about 9 feet long. Despite this impossibility, the craft proceeds on its way, gliding about 20 feet away from the men, then lifting upward without disturbing the air or making a sound. The craft makes a slight right turn and then, in Peniston's own words, is gone in the blink of an eye. Later, when a shaken Peniston would attempt to deliver a detailed incident and complaint report to the Central Security Control, they would tell him they heard every word he said over the radio during his time next to the craft. They could hear it all, but he could not hear them. The audio is believed to be somewhere in the Pentagon to this day. It's never been heard by the public. Thankfully, the same can't be said for the account of Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, who had encountered the craft 2 days later. That audio can be heard right now, and it's something you won't soon forget.
You'll see maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. Let's switch off.
Peniston kept his account of what happened on the morning of the 26th quiet, but rumors about a UFO had already begun to sweep through the base. Adding fuel to the fire were the track marks found near the sighting, which some attributed to the craft, even though Peniston would later say the vehicle had no landing gear. It was seemingly held up by the light emitting from the craft's lower half. 2 days later, Lieutenant Colonel Halt was at an officer's dinner at the Woodbridge Air Force Base when a lieutenant named England came to him and said, "The UFO is back." A group of servicemen had apparently seen strange lights out in the forest, and Halt decided to leave his dinner to join them in an investigation. It was just after midnight, December 28th. Halt and the men go out with Geiger counters, equipment meant for checking radiation, and they get some pings when they're in the neighborhood of the Peniston encounter. They collect soil and sap samples. Nothing incredible of note happening for those first few hours as they roamed around the area, although at one point they begin to hear odd animal noises, maybe coming from a nearby farm. But then, it happens. Strange lights appear in the sky and all of the men see them. In an official report delivered a year later, Halt would say a red sun-like light was seen through the trees, and at one point it appeared to throw off glowing particles and then broke into 5 separate white objects. He would go on to say 3 star-like objects were noticed in the sky, which rapidly moved in sharp, angular movements. They had red, green, and blue lights. These objects apparently remained in the sky for hours, all of the men witnessing the same phenomenon. It should also be noted that the men's Geiger counters had begun to light up as the lights make their presence known. The men become excited by what they see. Whatever it is, they can't explain it. The audio of the incident is fascinating and eerie. These men saw things in the sky they couldn't explain, and they went on record to hold to their stories. And while the stories would find themselves elaborated upon in the years that followed, it remains true that those 2 December mornings in Rendlesham Forest included events that may never be fully explained. As is always the case with these incidents, there is a healthy amount of skepticism in regards to Halt and the Peniston stories. One theory goes that all the men were seeing was a lighthouse not too far from the forest, although how a lighthouse could be mistaken for flying objects is indeed another mystery. Stories change as well. New memories pop up, the accounts get embellished, more details come to light. Whether or not that makes you more of a believer or not is up to the individual, but it's not surprising that the key members of these encounters would recollect them a bit differently later on. For example, the part where Jim Peniston touched the UFO and received 1s and 0s in his head, that was not part of the original report where Peniston claimed whenever he tried to get close to the object, it moved away from him. It's also worth noting that, at the time, Peniston was the only one of the 3 men to claim to have seen a tangible object. The other 2 just saw lights. Years later, one of those men, John Burroughs, would alter his story. Another intriguing and possibly suspect experience Jim Peniston would go on to discuss happened sometime after Lieutenant Halt's encounter. Peniston said he was taken in for an interview about what it was he saw on December 26th. He says 2 government inspectors interrogated him on his experience, and after he told them what happened, they let it be known that he was not to tell his account to anyone else in lieu of a cover story that they had concocted. Even more extreme, Peniston claims that the men drugged him with sodium pentothal, which resulted in amnesia. Only years later would he regain his memory, finally breaking his silence on what he encountered that fateful December morning. John Burroughs, who was also there for the first incident, would go on to say that he thought the thing he saw was not necessarily a UFO, but an experiment involving energy fields, saying, quote, "They were studying the energy field for different applications to include military use," and claiming the aforementioned lighthouse was emitting electromagnetic frequencies towards Rendlesham Forest. Whether or not that vision of the event is true is, well, quite subjective. As for Charles Halt, his story became exaggerated as well. In a 2010 affidavit, Halt elaborated on his story, saying that the UFOs sent down beams of light in front of he and his team. Another new detail was that the object flew over toward the Bentwaters military base and shined its light on the weapons storage area. Remember, there were rumors about nuclear weapons being housed in the Air Force bases, and in recent years we've seen tons of alleged UFO activity around military facilities. The thinking is, these beings, whatever they are curious and maybe a bit nervous about our weapon capabilities. Who can blame them? These evolving details can be chalked up to fading memory, or perhaps memories renewed. Or maybe they're flat-out lies, although it seems odd to risk destroying your reputation over such grandiose stories. That said, you can never underestimate some people's yearning for attention. In 1994, the British Military of Defense performed an official review on the incidents and found that there was no hoax involved, no misidentifications, and no lies. However, they never found a definitive explanation either. It's clear that a handful of unexplainable incidents occurred those 2 early mornings in Rendlesham, England. As it too often the case, we'll likely never get a hold of the whole story and the final answer. Today, you can walk into Rendlesham Forest and follow the UFO path, stand where those men stood at the end of 1980, and perhaps you'll even feel the charge they felt. And perhaps, if you go there at night, tilt your head up, and search just above the trees for strange lights, it's not impossible to believe you might see a light you can't explain. And maybe that light will see you too. We'll keep looking for the answers, as long as you do too. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. We plan to delve further into history's most important UFO incidents.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.